Welcome everyone to View from Left Field, a podcast where we focus on the news and our opinions on it. We have a special episode today. It's going to be on the case for public rail. For people that don't know out there, Railroad Workers United, which is a cross-craft caucus of railroad workers, launched a campaign for the nationalization of the railroads. And we have our regular panel here today. I'll introduce us quick. I'm SM Safone. We also have Jerry,
Hi, everyone.
Jimmy,
Hey everyone.
Nolan,
Hey everyone.
and we have a special guest here today, Adam, the national organizer for the Public Rail Now campaign.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, like I said, I'm the national organizer for Public Rail Now, and yeah, very happy to be here and talk about the case for public ownership of the railroads.
Thank you, Adam. I guess we could start out quick. What led to Railroad Workers United wanting to push for the public nationalization of the railroads?
Well, I mean, it's so with Public Rail Now, it's a coalition of different groups, including Railroad Workers United, but folks that live in trackside communities, rank and file railroad workers, environmental justice advocates, passenger rail advocates, anybody and everybody who's somehow connected to the rail system and wants to see it improved. And what kind of spurred this on is that we see an industry that's strangling itself to death, and you see this like really contradictory situation where this industry is in decline. They're not maintaining the infrastructure, they're not maintaining the equipment. The workforce is being gutted, and yet they're still making billions of dollars in profit. It's still a very profitable industry. And so anybody that's worked on the railroad or lives in a trackside community, if you're a small shipper, if you're a farmer, you've no doubt noticed what the degradation that's occurred on the industry. And it's just very clear that it's all due to the United States being in this anomalous position as far as the world's concerned of having a lock, stock, and barrel privately owned rail system. There's really nowhere else on the planet that has that arrangement. So in order to address all of these problems, whether it's gutting the workforce, the health and safety concerns that workers have, all of these different aspects, it just became very clear that, well, if we want to address any of this, we have to take the rail system out of private hands. It's all rooted in the pursuit of profit, short-term profit by the Class 1 railroads. So that's that's kind of the short answer. There's a lot more to it, obviously, but yeah, I mean, there's an astonishing amount of problems with the railroad industry, and it's all rooted in the private ownership.
Thank you, Adam. That was a great answer. It might have been short, but it was a very detailed answer, especially for somebody who's first hearing about the campaign. For those of us that followed the contract fight 2 years ago, and then of course the East Palestine disaster not long after, one thing that kept popping up throughout everything was precision scheduled railroading. Could you just give a brief description of how precision scheduled railroading has essentially destroyed the rail system? I mean, you gave a good point already, but I guess we could go a little bit more into that.
Sure. So precision scheduled railroading, or if you ask railroad workers, pretty shitty railroading is what PSR stands for. The trains are getting longer and longer. They're getting heavier and heavier. So that aspect alone makes it increasingly dangerous. But it's also about, like I said, like gutting the workforce, like the single person crews question. That's been something they've been trying to do for a long time, is just have basically a skeleton crew running these these 2 or 3 mile long trains that are heavier and heavier. Like I said, it's I guess like the shortest way I can describe it is austerity on the railroad. It's like, how can we just squeeze the workforce as much as possible, get the operating ratio as low as possible. And um, yeah, we see the consequences of that all over the place in the industry. It's not, I mean, there's the workforce, obviously. It's like, well, they're gutting workers and they're working towards, automation and remote control and all this kind of stuff. But it's also like, if you're a small shipper, they're gonna, no, screw you. Sorry. Like, it's much more profitable for them to just provide service to the biggest shippers instead of any kind of like small local, shippers that need to get stuff from here to there. So you see a lot of smaller shippers moving to trucks, and I mean that's a whole other issue too. But it's also like I was mentioning folks that live in trackside communities. You brought up East Palestine. It's a great example. It's like, well, like I was saying earlier, they aren't maintaining the infrastructure. They're not maintaining the equipment. They're cutting the amount of time that a person has to inspect the rails, the rail cars, to make sure that they're actually operational. There was actually, I think it was on UP, something like the FRA found something like 73% of rail cars on Union Pacific have defects. But again, it's austerity, so they're just like, well,
Wow.
get it out of here.
Didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's basically what precision scheduled railroading is. It's well, it's typical of businesses. We're gonna cut corners as much as we can in order to make as much profit as we can.
And real quick on that, precision scheduled railroading for the board of directors, for everyone, they're just numbers, right? They just want to see these metrics increase, whether that be the length of a train, the tonnage of a train. But one metric that is not really indicated in precision schedule railroading is any sort of safety metric, whether that be on defects for cars. Like, that is not something I could tell you is ever measured. So hearing that UP's defects on their own equipment, that doesn't surprise me too much. But thanks for putting that insight. I learned something new.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
And this line of thinking has expanded into public transit, mass transit. I know here in New York City, we've seen this in the buses and the subways. Uh, uh, we where I work, we got at least 50% of our buses are defective, and I think that's a very conservative estimate. And we've even seen in New York City subways with TWU, the Transport Workers Union, in their last contract fight, the transit authority wanted to reduce a subway cruise to one person in a lot of places. It's not just, it's even not just these private companies. A lot of public transit now is following suit with the private companies because they're operating on that same mentality of profit, 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 even though technically it's not profit. Which brings me to my next question. With the nationalization of the railroads, how could we ensure it would, with a nationalized railroad, we wouldn't run into the same problems where they're operating under the same mentality? Um, and I know this goes back to the old Plum Plan, and how much public rail now is based off of the old Plum Plan.
Yeah, great question. And yeah, I mean, and just to kind of go back to what you were saying before, like just as far as the decline of the industry and things like safety not being measured. I've been talking to a lot of railroad workers over the past couple of weeks doing this interview project, and I've heard there's multiple guys that have said, "Hey, if the situation with Boeing scares you, you don't even want to know about the railroad. Like you don't want to know what the hell's going on." So there's
Oh
that
wow.
aspect of it that's frightening. But yeah, as far as the Plum Plan and how we would prevent basically the same exploitation or the level of exploitation to occur in a public system versus private. I compare it a lot to the struggles of public education teachers. Like I used to be a teacher in inner city public schools, and the way that I see it, it's you're still fighting the boss. Like even if the boss is public, like you're still fighting the boss, even if it's a state entity. The difference is that the reason I use the example of public education is that you see these efforts of trying to privatize public education. They defund it, defund it, defund it, and then they point the finger and say, "Oh well, look how inefficient public education is. We like if we just ran it like a business, it would be better." And the biggest advocates for keeping education public and improving it is teachers and their communities. And so I foresee that being something that it'll look similar on the railroads. It's like anything else. Any other public sector worker, uh, the railroad workers in a nationalized system would think be the primary advocates for improving it. It's so bad out there right now that I mean, there as long as there's that employee-employer relationship, there's always going to be that conflict. But right now, it's so bad that it's like anything would be better, like in a way. But yeah, I think if we and it kind of does go back to the Plum Plan. Like, so for those who don't know, a big part of the Plum Plan was this sort of like idea that the public, the workers, and management or whatever would run this tripartite like system. And I mean, while we might disagree with the management aspect of that, we like to say labor, the public, and the planet. But the idea is that at least the workforce would have a democratic say in how the thing is run. You know, you don't have that in a private industry. It's completely, it's autocracy in any kind of private industry. Um, so yeah, we do take a lot of inspiration from the Plum Plan, and um, what that'll look like implemented in the context of today, we'll see. But yeah, in short, given workers a bigger say in how the actual industry is run, which would reverse a tendency that has been for over the past 50 years, like workers have pretty much just given up control of the workforce or the workplace um, in favor of these sort of peace contracts with management. And I think if you look at the railroad industry and it in a nationalized situation, it would be. I'm excited to see what it'll look like when workers actually are having some kind of level of democratic decision making within the industry.
Yeah, that all sounds great. I'm glad you brought up the tripartite leadership. And of course, the management aspect of that is not perfect, but it's a step in the right direction, and we could always build off of that in the future.
Yeah, definitely.
So, thank you again for coming on. I've learned so much on this campaign. My question was kind of similar. Do you anticipate if, per se, in the future when everything does get passed, will there be some kind of fight like what the federal government does with the post office, where they force the post office to pay for pensions of all the workers right now to keep it underfunded, or force them to do extra work for private contractors? Do you see any of that being a future fight or a concern? Thank you.
Yeah, and that's and yeah, I mean that's something that I've thought about quite a bit. Is yeah, I mean we see this sort of continued destruction of the commons and privatization of public institutions. And I brought up public education. I think the post office is another great example. Yeah, that fight will absolutely be there because even if we are to, if I could hit the button and we nationalize the rail system tomorrow, that it doesn't the fight doesn't stop there. So yeah, I totally can foresee political opponents or class enemies coming after us and either trying to reprivatize it or gut it the way that they've been. Yeah, I mean the attacks on the post office are because you hear everybody all the time like, oh, the post office is they can't run it's not profitable. It's like, well, who says that about the military? Like the Pentagon loses billions of dollars in its couch cushions, and nobody's like, "Oh, the military is not profitable." You know what I mean? Of course, they'd like to privatize the military, but um, no. I mean, yeah, the fight to preserve public institutions in this country. I mean, it's going to be like that even if we get the public rail system.
And people forget if it's nationalized, if it's under public control, it's not supposed to be profitable.
Exactly.
If efficiency for public resources and efficiency for capitalists are two different things. We, in our minds, efficiency is it runs smoothly and properly. For them, they're just worried about making more and more profit at the expense of everybody else. Uh,
Yeah, and on that real quick, it's not that it's definitely the board of directors, the people that are trying to incentivize profit at the end. But I've noticed that there are huge problems with privatizing the railroads, as that even hurts the customers, where they actually don't get what they need, and they'll actually customer complaints increase because of precision schedule railroading. And that manifests in ways of inventory in certain yards being overly congested, and a lack of embargoing certain yards, like actually creating these embargoes that force customers to wait, and therefore it creates like a problem. Like it's not just the workers that benefit. It really is America's economy that benefits from this as well. I didn't know if you wanted to speak about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's it yeah, I'm just thinking of a conversation I had with a railroad worker the other night. Where it's you think about the land grants, all the like public funds that have been given to the railroad industry, all this stuff. And then, I mean, you look at like the smack in the face that, railroad workers got in 2022 when, the federal government crammed a contract down their throats. It's like, this industry is too important for us to allow you to go on strike. Well, then why the hell is it in private hands? If it's that important, like, why is it a privately owned industry? It doesn't make any sense. But yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, during World War One, the railroad industry was actually nationalized. That's before the Plum Plan. That's what we were talking about earlier. Um, because it was just like everybody just accepted the facts. It was like this industry does not run efficiently, and it cannot serve the needs of the country under private control. It's like everybody could just acknowledge that. Now it's like there's this sort of the free market fetishists are like, well, anything that the government does is bad, and that's kind of what we're dealing with, So, but yeah, I mean, it's a sort of like dogma that anybody left of Genghis Khan is having to struggle with all the time, like talking to people, that actually public institutions are good, like, yeah.
Oh, of course, they hate public institutions because it puts a check on their autocratic power. And and of course that's where we come in here with you from left field and other left wing podcasts, because that's where the counteraction, we're the counterbalance to their rhetoric and their propaganda, to help it bring it on the worker's perspective and not from the boss's perspective. Uh Go ahead, Jimmy.
Um, Thank you. Adam, like I think most people, I was not aware of Railroad Workers United's existence until the squashed strike of 2022. So everyone here, we've been following Railroad Workers United since then, but just a quick bit of research, it looks like you've been around since I guess 2007, which is goes back farther than I realized. Could you give just a little bit more general background of where Railroad Workers United has come from, and if you will, what you might be expecting are going to be the challenges going forward under the Trump administration?
Sure, that's a lot. So I'm about to blab. So interrupt me.
Good.
Blab all you
uh,
want.
so yeah, Railroad Workers United is, like, the simplest way to say it is an organization that carries on the spirit of Eugene Debs. So, like, for people that don't know, um, there was a time when the idea of having one big railroad union, the ARU, that's that's really like where the kind of idea comes from, but it's just industrial unionism in general. So again, it's a lot. So I'm going to try to make this as coherent as possible. There's like 13 different rail unions right now. I've been in the labor movement my entire adult life, and I'll tell you, like, this is when you read about the old craft unionism versus industrial unionism stuff, when the Gompers stuff versus, uh, the amalgamation of unions. That's what this is exactly. It's the last. It's if it's not the last, it's one of the last hangovers of like that sort of like splintered, backbiting craft unionism. So that's what you're dealing with here. So Railroad Workers United was started with the idea that we should have one big union on the railroad. We would have a lot more power. It doesn't make any sense that the engineers, the conductors, the carmen, like the machinists, the electricians, all like everybody that works on the railroad, you're all in the same shop. Like you're all like it doesn't make sense that we're all splintered like this. And all it does is gives management the opportunity to, split, play you against each other.
Preach.
You'll hear, yeah, like it's wild. It's unfortunate because like I've attended different conferences for different rail unions, and it's like you'll hear some guys in union office like just make a point of talking shit about like other workers in different unions, and it's like, what are you doing? Like you're doing exactly what the boss wants you to do. So anyway,
Yep.
Railroad Workers United is comes out of that idea of like we have a lot more power if we unite. And so it's a caucus of rank and file railroad workers in any and every union, even some unorganized workers. There's solidarity members, and that's really where it comes from. And yeah, a lot of people, the first time they heard about Railroad Workers United was in 2022, and the reason for that is that Railroad Workers United has been the only totally unashamed, loud advocates for railroad workers, and they're not afraid to say things like we need to nationalize the railroad system. Like they don't play like those sort of political games that a lot of union leadership, misleadership in the railroad unions do. Because it's a rank and file driven organization. It's like, well, we're not rubbing elbows at Democrat or GOP like luncheon or something. Like, you know what I mean? So it's like, there's no strings attached to this. As far as the upcoming administration, I mean, well, like it's you got what Sean Duffy, I think, is set to be the Secretary of Transportation. He's like a airline industry lobbyist. So yeah, it's going to be catastrophic. It's going to be bad, but it's been bad, So like I try to maintain a level of optimism there, where it's like, well, some of the greatest gains labor has made in U.S. history has been in times when the environment was a lot more hostile. So it's going to be tough, but at the same time, even if we don't have a high degree of legislative victories, I think if we can keep up that militancy and have each other's backs, I think we can still accomplish a lot, at least on the shop floor.
Yep, of course. And everybody should remember progress isn't linear. You're going to have peaks and valleys, ebbs and flows. And, best case scenario, and we should be hopeful, best case scenario, it helps us with our organizing and brings more people on board. And I love listening to everything you just said. Of course, everybody on this panel is from different organizations that are part of the Movement for the People's Democracy Coalition, and I come from Labor United Educational League, and we come from the thinking of William Z. Forster, which is almost right on with what you just said: amalgamation, industrial unionism. We have more power together than apart, and I love listening to everything you just said.
Thanks. I just keep talking and hope I say something that sounds good.
Oh, it's been wonderful so far.
Yeah. I was going to mention and ask you a question because we brought up pretty shitty railroading or PSR. I'm going to definitely use that.
That's right.
When it comes to automation, this is a big issue, and I'm curious how that's going to affect the railroading industry and why we need a nationalized railroad, because we see jobs going in the way of automation. But I don't know if you wanted to speak about that, Adam.
Yeah, I mean, I think in any industrial job, like that's a concern. So from what I've heard from railroad workers, there's sites that are already doing some tests as far as uh, you know, autonomous trains and all that kind of stuff. I don't foresee that being implemented quickly. It's going to take some time, but yeah, I mean they've already been inching towards that. With like they basically have for anybody who doesn't work on the railroad, basically the equivalent of like cruise control, like on the trains and the cab. So that's already been a problem because if you've worked on the railroad for 10, 20, 30 years, like you develop this muscle memory. Like if you know you're gonna be going over, you know, a spot of track that's gonna shake you around a little bit, you can kind of plan for that, or you can, pump the brakes a little bit. Um, but the automated system doesn't recognize that. So that's just one example. And you got guys that like will be flung out of their chairs and hit the damn ceiling, like because the cruise control system or whatever is not taking into consideration the actual environment around it. So in other words, I'm saying that the system that they've already been implementing, inching towards automation, is already imperfect and it's crap. Um, it's going to take it'll take a while before they can actually have like, oh, here's a fully uh, automated train. But
Right.
it's definitely something they're planning on doing. I don't think it's something that I don't want to be like alarmist about it, but it's like anything else. It's like, yeah, of course they're going to try to do that. You
Yep.
know.
No, you're right. That is part of the strategy, is through the sort of cruise control. I think it's called TA. That, yeah, oh yeah, that saves gas. That can be a help with safety, but that is the goal. I've been told that it is to slowly automate the jobs of the engineers to actually replace them. So you're absolutely correct. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, and of course, automation is going to happen, but who does automation help? If it's there to help the bosses, it's no good. If it's there to help the workers and make their jobs easier, what as long as it benefits the workers, that's where we should be worried. And of course, as long as we're under this system, they couldn't give two shits about the workers. Excuse my language. But yeah, it's very important. And I've noticed in some of your talking, and sorry, it took me a little long for my brain to catch on to it, but you've talked about shippers, you've talked about, farmers. That brings us to something we push a lot over here, and that's the anti-monopoly coalition. Because, these railroads are probably the worst monopolies there are. Right? Or, when they band together like they did with the bargaining campaign, they were flat out cartel. And one of the worst kinds. So of course it's us, the workers, whether it be railroad workers or other workers in general, that should bring all the different groups together because we're all fighting monopoly, and monopoly is a threat to everybody and everyone, and we can't forget that.
Yeah, and I mean that's it's funny. I mean, even hack economists like now have to admit, like, actually, the trajectory of this system is towards monopoly. It's funny, like that's been something that we've been saying for a long time. Like,
And they've been denying, but now they're finally realizing it themselves.
yeah, and it's like, yeah, I think cartel is a great way to describe the railroad industry. I mean, but it's like anything else. I mean, this idea that the ruling class is just like sitting in the back room, like competing. No, they're not. Like, what are you talking about? Like, they're absolutely coordinated and organized. And yeah, the class one railroads, it's like you think of old like gangs, like it's like, hey, this is my turf. I get this street. You get your guys on that street or whatever. Like, I control this part of town. You control this part of town. And if you look at how the U.S. is carved up with the class ones, it's exactly like that. Like, and it's a coordinated effort. So yeah, absolutely. And if it's not, I mean, it might as well be a monopoly. Like that's the funny thing is like these kind of like uh market fetishist types will they'll say, "Oh no, look, it's healthy competition." It's like, okay, well, I got a bridge to sell you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they leave out the part where all competitions, there has to be a winner and a loser. They always forget that part.
Yep.
Are there examples that you can give, Adam? I know we briefly mentioned how we are a bit more of the exception, and nationalized railroads have been, it's kind of the norm in other countries. I wonder if we could expand on that, especially, I don't know a whole lot about Mexico's government or its new president, but I think apparently, is it true that they're pushing for a nationalized passenger rail? If you know anything about that, could you speak on that as maybe an example or any other examples from around the world?
Yeah, and Mexico's that's absolutely true. They are pushing towards nationalization, and that's great. As far as yeah, I mean, the United States is an anomaly, like because even in other countries, like you might have a system where okay, the like what's called like open access, like the government owns the infrastructure and private companies can kind of like you know rent rent the rail basically, like pay the government to use it. Personally, I'm in favor of total top down nationalization, like get private companies completely out of it. Um, yeah, I mean, depending where you go, I mean, China's a really good example. Their rail system is excellent, almost completely electrified. That's another aspect, like the climate issue. Under private ownership in this country, we'll never see things like a fully electrified catenary rail, which is what needs to happen. Um, I mean, even like India, fully nationalized rail system, great, and it has a good rail system. Um, and it's places. I mean, if you look at like the European Union, like you won't find a private rail system. It's like even in the UK. I mean, so the two examples that I kind of point people to is the UK and Canada. Those are both pretty good examples because there's not people around that can talk about what the rail system was like during World War One. But Canada privatized their rail system in 1995. Um, and under Thatcher in the UK, that's when they privatized their rail system. If people can tell you the how dramatic the change was, like, well, yeah, I mean, if for public or passenger rail, yeah, it's going to cost more to use it. And even as far as freight's concerned, the service quality went down. They're cutting corners. The infrastructure is uh, experiencing degradation. Like we can see in real time, in a way, like, oh yeah, this is all because you privatized a public institution. Like you privatized a public utility, and that's what happens. So yeah, I'm excited about what's going on in Mexico. Absolutely. Um, and we've been talking with folks in Canada as well. And it's funny. You talk to workers from wherever. If it's anything like here, it's like they're all saying the same thing. Why the hell is this a private industry? Doesn't make any sense. So
Absolutely. Right.
yeah. So yeah,
It,
like, but in short, yeah. I mean, you can look at any number of countries and I mean, any rail system that is worth a damn is at least in part a public institution. It might be open access or it might be fully nationalized, but uh, a fully lock, stock, and barrel privately owned rail industry is an anomaly. It doesn't make, and it's even here it is. Highways aren't private, ports aren't private, airports aren't private. Like it's like, why the hell is the railroad? Like it doesn't make any sense.
well, because you get to choose the kind of service you want, or you don't have to pay a full premium price. That is something I'm hearing a lot in the railroads is, well, there might be some customers that want to pay for a premium service or something along those lines. And what it turns out is it actually is a worse service for the customer to begin with anyway. It's very frustrating. But I do want to push this international solidarity because as we mentioned, Mexico, where it should be pushing an international movement. This doesn't just affect American railroaders. This affects Mexican railroaders. This affects Canadian railroaders. And how does a public nationalized railroad, I guess, affect, I would say, an international movement? Or is that really too broad of a question to ask? Because I'm all about solidarity internationally.
Yeah, I mean, that is a broad question, and I won't blab too long on it, but or I'll try not to. But yeah, so as far as I mean, look, capital is not, it doesn't stick around in one country. You know, we're at this point we are all completely connected, and the one of the things that I've been like considering and thinking about and talking to folks about is what are the international implications like of a public rail system? Like if we have a public rail system where we're still going to ship munitions, like like there's all these kinds of questions like that, like because the industry here has a direct impact everywhere else. I mean, it's totally globalized economy. But if we it's kind of like I was saying earlier. It's like at the very least, it gives the public and it gives workers a say in how the industry operates. And right now, we don't have that. So we have these completely unaccountable robber barons running everything. And if you think they don't care about international solidarity, at least like in the sense that they don't care about the average person anywhere, they just care about the profit motive. But there would have to be, yeah. I mean, it's in thinking about. I'm thinking specifically about the U.S. and Canada. Like, if Canada was to renationalize their rail system and we nationalized ours, yeah, there would have to be different kinds of trade agreements or different kinds of elements of a trade agreement, like it's written up, like because we've got Canadian railroads coming into the United States and vice versa. So, what does that look like? I can't tell you because we're not there yet. But at the very least, I think we should have an international perspective and engage in the struggle nationally. It's like the task at hand is here, but we should absolutely keep in mind that everything's connected at this point. So that's kind of a vague answer to a broad question.
No, I appreciate that.
No,
I like
no, no, it was a good answer, and I have a follow-up to that because we all know the 2022 rail fiasco was blocked because of the Railway Labor Act. And for that international aspect, for the workers to be able to hold that international solidarity, one thing that they would have to do is work stoppages and strikes to block any of these, like say weapon shipments, like you brought up. How would Public Rail Now, and what is a Public Rail Now position on the Railway Labor Act? Is it looking to repeal it so the workers can use that direct action, and it would have a greater effect on international solidarity?
So I can't speak for the organization as a whole. We don't have any kind of official line on the Railway Labor Act, but it's an interesting question because when we were at the this year's RWU convention, we had Joe Burns there, great labor writer. If you haven't read his books, Class Struggle Unionism, highly recommend. And his point was, hey, look, I mean, the Railway Labor Act, you could still technically use it to strike. Like it was kind of like picking it apart from like a sort of like legal standpoint. It's so repeat. I mean, I guess the question would be like, what would it be replaced with? You know what I mean? It's like I think I've got a lot of problems with but even the Wagner Act has problems. It's like, but what would it be replaced with? but I do think that based on the conversations that I've been having with folks, it might not really matter. Like these guys are ready to strike. And I think right now, I mean, practically, like I think we are the best shot we've got is something like a national wildcat. Because I don't think the union leadership will ever agree to actually take a major industrial action like that. But
I'm glad you brought up Wildcat because that's one of the big things with the Railway Labor Act. Doesn't it completely ban Wildcat strikes?
it kneecaps, yeah, direct action, like of all kinds. Like, but and again, this speaks to the whole thing of like, well, if it's that important of an industry that you have to prevent people from striking, then why the hell is it private? Like, you know,
A-
it's
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we're all on board there.
No pun intended, right? Okay.
Yeah, all aboard. On the topic of munitions and stuff, I mean, I've heard people within my own union when the rail strike of 2022 came up. In my own union, very pro union people say that it was a risk to national security, so it was justified to be squished by the Biden administration. And that was a kind of a disappointing moment for me in my own union. And I've got a good question here somewhere. Just give me a second.
Just quick,
The
national security for whom?
Yeah. Well, so there you go. But the longshoremen strike that just happened a little while ago, to my knowledge, was what it was allowing military shipments through. It was not going to impede on that. And without having all the details in front of me, I think it's pretty fair to say that the longshoreman strike was not squished, so therefore, to a certain extent, more successful than the rail strike. I'm trying to say this as objectively as I can. Is it? And of course, everybody here, we'd love to have a strike that prevents military munitions from being shipped over to places like Ukraine and places like Israel to be dropped on Palestine. But here's the question is, and this is another big question. So I would like to hear if anybody on this call has a good question, because I think it's a tough one. Is trying to dabble in the with the idea of stopping things like military supplies from being shipped overseas even worth the trouble?
yeah,
Open
and
to anybody.
I'll try to answer to the best of my ability, and that's a huge question. Yeah, so like it's an important one. I and I think it goes back to kind of like what I was saying about the position of railroad workers in a nationalized rail system being a lot like teachers or other workers in the public sector, quote unquote public sector, and how they are in a position to be the best advocates for improving and expanding public service and fighting against privatization and things like that. So making collaboration with the military industrial complex less profitable, I think is absolutely a goal. Like that would be something that, rank and file railroad workers would have to fight for. I think a good example is like, I mean, look at so there's two longshore unions in this country for folks that are listening that don't know. You've got what I consider to be the good one on the West Coast, ILWU, and you've got sort of less good one, historically mobbed up by LA. Not knocking them, hey,
Yep.
I'm based in Cleveland. They're here in Cleveland. I'll walk the picket line with them whenever they strike. Unfortunately, the Great Lakes have a different contract than the East Coast. But anyway, thing is, like, yeah, like you said, they did not interrupt military shipments. So that was like one of the things that they said, well, we're going to strike, but we will not we're not going to impede any kind of business having to do with the military.
It was strategic.
Yeah. And so like I said earlier, national security for whom? Like, I mean, that's the same kind of BS answer that I was in East Palestine for the NTSB hearing that happened over the summer, and when they were trying to get the consist information, like what's actually in the rail cars, what's in the tanks, uh, the AAR, American Association of Railroads, or Association of American Railroads, told them, well, that's on a need to know basis. We don't have to tell you. That's a matter of national security. Well, it's a matter of, like, if I'm living in a trackside community and I know there's vinyl chloride getting rolled through here on a rickety DOT 111 like train car, like that has something to do with my security. Like, if there's munitions getting shipped around me and it derails, if there's a bunch of bombs on a train, or if there's like in those instances, like I think in San Francisco and in I think New Jersey or in New York, years ago, where stuff like that happened, where there were like shipments of munitions that blew up and actually like were really close to people's neighborhoods. That's a matter of national security. But
That's need to know.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like, oh, we don't got to tell you. But I bring up the ILWU because I mean, especially in the Bay Area, like during the apartheid regime in South Africa, they took a stand against it and said, we're not handling South African cargo. They've taken stands against Israel. We're not handling Israeli cargo. We're standing against genocide. We're standing against apartheid. The Port of Oakland's public, or at least quasi-public. So it's like it would be a similar situation for railroad workers. The port is public infrastructure, and if the railroad system was nationalized, the railroad workers would be in a similar position of like they'd at least they'd be strategically better off in a position under a public rail system than in a private, in order if for combating any kind of business having to do with the military industrial complex, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And, maybe something we need to think about, and that's all working class people go along with this fight for public rail, even at least pushing for the repeal of the sections that block strikes of the Railway Labor Act, of repealing Taft-Hartley, which blocks sympathy strikes. That would all make it easier for labor, not just railroaders, but all labor, to have have a say over these international issues and international solidarity. And I'm glad you brought up the ILWU, because that was very, very important. ILWU has played a major role since the days of Harry Bridges. And I think everybody here has a great admiration for Harry Bridges and the role he played in bringing a militant class-oriented unionism, or as Joe Burns would say, class struggle unionism to the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, hey, in that connection, how the railroad industry is connected to everything else. I mean, that's why if you look at U.S. labor history, it's the first major capitalist institutions here were the railroads, and that's why when there was the major uprising, the strike in 1877, that was our Paris Commune. Like people were making comparisons like that even back then. Like, I mean, it's so there's a
Well
great
said.
there's a great history. And it scares the hell out of them to this day, because it's like, yeah, if you control the railroads, if you can shut down the railroads, you can shut down pretty much everything else.
Yeah, no, so I had a question that may be more future plans as well. Is there any talk about, as well, with nationalizing the railroads, getting more manufacturing and industry back in the States? Because first off, I don't even know if the US still manufactures rails for the railroads, or if we import those from somewhere else. And also, at least around the Twin Cities area, there actually used to be a railroad car manufacturing company that was actually making some of the trains for the light rail here, until they got bought by a company out of France, and then they basically shut down all their operations. So I was wondering, is there any plans or discussions with other industries, and I guess adjacent industries to the railroads?
Yeah, for sure. And for anybody that's interested, definitely want to encourage listeners to go to publicrailnow.org and look at what we've got on there as far as we have a couple different reports out there now. One is what we call the white paper. It's the case for the public rail system by Maddox Thomas, and then we also have an economic impact study. And yeah, if you it's just in the first couple of pages. Like even if it's pretty dense and it's a lot of like economic stuff. So if you're having trouble getting to sleep sometime, you can try to read the whole thing. But even if you just read the first 15 pages, we stand to avert over $190 billion in public health, environmental, fiscal costs. We would save $400 billion annually on shipping costs. And then when you look at the jobs aspect of that, 180,000 new jobs just in the railroad, but up to 4 million, millions and millions of jobs in adjacent industries, or just through the indirect impact of expansion. And that's something that the class ones, they're totally allergic to capital expenditure, so they're not expanding. It's getting more and more congested. It's strangling itself while making billions of dollars in profit. But even if we took the profit motive out of it and expanded it, yeah, you're talking about a lot of new jobs, not just on the railroads. And like, in this is the whole thing. I could blab about it for a long time, so stop me. But like, when you think about passenger rail, I was just in Tucson recently for a Rail Passenger Association conference. And they are talking about all these like ambitious plans, like, yeah, we need to expand passenger rail. We want to bring passenger rail back to XYZ town. Like they were talking about Phoenix, and what was the holdup? Well, we got to see how Union Pacific feels about that. We got to see how the class ones feel about that. Because if they don't agree to it, then we ain't gonna get it. And so even if you're thinking about an economic impact, well, major portion of the country, like I think it's like something like 1/3 of the population relies on public transportation. So if you're talking about even just commuter rail, that if you brought that into areas that have been neglected, and like you're opening up, oh, I can actually like go to work now, or I can go get a job, across town, like because I can actually hop on the train and get there, like even opening up transportation as a means to get to work. I mean, that's going to have an impact for people being able to get jobs. Like there's all these different elements involved, but in short, yeah, absolutely, we've been talking about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've heard on the contrary that from people up high in the railroads that they say, well, the reason why we don't push for transportation, it's not profitable, and that's their bottom line. Which of course that it's not supposed to be profitable. We don't care if it's profitable, but I was going to bring that up too, because that is the push, is to make sure that the government does not nationalize the railroads to make it a public entity. And you hear that, oh well, public railroads or the public sector, it's corrupt and it will create more problems. How do we combat that? Because I would find that ridiculous that unions could actually hold them accountable. But I didn't know if you wanted to speak about that public entities are actually can be held more accountable because we can democratically make our own positions. But can you speak about that, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, it's really astounding some of the things you hear. Some of like I don't even know. I'm having trouble finding the words. Just like if I encountered somebody who said the private sector is less corrupt than the public,
Right?
you know what I mean? It's like, well, it's kind of like yeah, you just go like you go around in circles because it's like you talk to free market libertarian types or whoever, and it's just like, well, the government's corrupt. I don't like big government because XYZ. They're corrupt. Well, who's corrupted?
Well, and
You know
what
what I
you
mean?
just brought up Yeah, what you just brought up earlier, how there's these catastrophes from hazmat trains. Well, we didn't know about that. We didn't know that these were being carried around in our city limits. Like, don't you find there's a sense of corruption there?
Yeah, I mean, it's like sometimes there's just not enough breadcrumbs to bring some people home. Like, it's like, man, like you got to connect the dots. It's like, hey, yeah, is there corruption? Absolutely, but who's doing the corrupting? These the capitalists are. Like, it's like the class one railroads are absolutely corrupt, and they're one of the. Well, I mean, I'm not naive, but like I was saying earlier about the NTSB hearing in East Palestine, the folks on the board were like astounded. I can't believe this industry is essentially self-regulating. They make their own standards, they make their own rules, like, and they decide when they're going to follow them. I mean, is that not corruption?
There's 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 nothing. There's no more corruption than the profit motive.
Yeah, and it's follow the dollar.
Absolutely. Thank you, Adam, for joining us. This was a great conversation. And as of course, as more comes forward with the Public Rail Now campaign, we'd love to have you on again and talk about that. Could you just give us some closing comments? And I guess we could go around the horn with everybody with closing comments.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, and I would love to be back on. And yeah, I encourage your listeners check out publicrailnow.org. You can find my contact information there. You can get involved. There's some links, whether you're part of an organization or you're an individual that wants to dive in. Um, yeah, we definitely want to hear from you. So, and if you're in a union, that's one of the things we're prioritizing is getting union support for this because, like we've kind of been talking about in one way or another this whole time, this matters to the whole working class, whether you're a railroad worker or you're in a different industry. So, yeah, thanks again.
Thank you, Adam.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I found this lecture or this conversation very insightful. I thought I knew a lot about the railroads, but I was wrong. I think our friend Adam brought up a lot of good points. How important it is, not just for railroaders or people that are working in the railroads, but for everyone in this country to support a public rail now, a nationalized railroad. As we see, like with our roads or with other entities like the post office, this is going to be a plus for the working class and for Americans. Thanks for coming on, Adam.
Yeah,
Yep.
you bet. Thanks.
And I'm just glad that we got to have you on, Adam. I'm sure we'll see you around. You're gracious to let us know when to get on stuff that you're having, and we'll keep letting you know when you can get on stuff that we're having. And yeah, I mean, like I work in construction, but I think any any industry is in or around the railroad. So, especially if someone is unionized, it's worth having a conversation with their coworkers about.
Yeah, this has been great. I think we've all learned a lot. I think after this conversation, I don't think anybody is feeling any pessimism. I think we're all excited about how the future is going to play out. And
No,
the more,
definitely, yeah. Thank you for coming on again. And I learned so much, and railroads have always been a hobby of mine since I was a child. So hearing about my favorite subject, this was great.
Hey,
yes,
anytime.
and thanks everybody for listening into A View from Left Field. And of course, when this episode is released, I believe it's later on that week, the Wednesday. Louisville has its monthly Harry Bridges School of Labor, and Adam will be on with us then as well, and we'll be talking about public rail there as well. So this is a very important topic, and going forward, this will be something a lot of groups are going to be focusing on, and we can't wait to bring more people on board for the Public Rail Now campaign. Goodbye, everybody.
Ah.
Take care, all.
Take care, all.